Great.
And I
Um,
am all set. And again, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
we appreciate you, Julie. Membership
Thank you.
is a big job. And you do the attendance, you do the directory, you do the recertifications, and we love you for it.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to our Betty Peters.
Thanks, Emily. Just wanted to announce that we have sold 126 tickets so far. So I think we're off to a good start. Thank you for encouraging everyone to not only buy a ticket for themselves, but to buy a ticket to get one of their friends or family to buy a ticket as well. That way we can hopefully reach our goal. Um, one of the things, the advantages you will get from this attending the conference is you'll be obtaining 5 hours of your required educational credits for certification as a master gardener. So that's another advantage of attending our conference. Just want to put a plug in that we do need a lot of volunteer help on Friday afternoon from, say, around 3:30 to 5, and then Saturday morning and Saturday during the day, as well as Saturday at the end of the conference for getting the vendors moved in and out. We also need runners for door prizes and help with registration, help with food. So Dina Richardson is leading our volunteers, and if you're interested in volunteering for any of those times, contact her. You know, some of the things we need volunteers for are to excuse me, just direct people, so you don't have to necessarily do a lot of heavy lifting. So if you can't, if you have back problems or issues where you can't have trouble lifting things, you could volunteer to help direct traffic in the building and things like that. So we do need a lot of volunteer help that I'm recruiting. But it should be a good conference. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, Betty, I have a question. If you volunteer at the conference, do you also get your ed hours? You're on mute. Oh, you are still on mute.
Yeah.
Betty, honey, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me? I just
Yeah, hi, Margie.
yeah, any time we put into volunteering, even before, during, and after, if you're focused and have a leadership position to make that our conference happen, of course, your hours are absolutely counted for volunteer work. So keep a good logging of the hours you put in and what you did during that hour. So
Okay.
the date, the time, and what you did. It'll just help flow that and let people understand the kind of volunteering that we're doing.
So sorry, for some reason I was having trouble getting myself unmuted. But yes, if you're attending the conference and listening to the speakers, you get the education hours for the speakers you hear. But if you're also helping with volunteer work, you should be able to get those hours as well.
Double whammy, guys. That
Absolutely.
sounds like a big incentive.
Mhm.
Um, Julie Fromm's off camera tonight, but do you want to pipe up and talk about grants?
Yeah, so happy to announce that we are offering grants and scholarships again this year. We just determined this at our budget meeting that we had at the beginning of February. So we're a little late in getting things rolling. So I talked to Emily or texted Emily today. I think we're going to extend that deadline until I think May 1. And we can still get out the notifications in June. That's not a problem. I don't think. And I'm gonna be working with Sally and we'll get that probably the application and then all of the scope that is involved in that and the details of the scholarship and grants will be hopefully posted on our website and also go out in an e-blast. And we are trying to offer 2 scholarships, both for $300 this year. Sometimes people don't need that much, and then we could maybe sometimes pull in another applicant and kind of divvy it up that way. It's happened in the past. So, but our maximum that we're feeling comfortable with this year is a $600 amount. And again, that information will be coming out to the general membership, hopefully by the end of the week. And I think that's pretty much sums it up.
And I want to thank Julie for taking the lead on this. It was also, our budget is tight this year. We're projected to lose money, but as a board, we decided that this is so crucial to our mission, to promote garden education out in the real world. We're going to find a way to fund this. And so really exciting to be back doing that. And it's just a great way to involve the community in the Master Gardener mission. Okay, last but certainly not least, we have our little stick figure, Nancy Schmid on Bowers Farm. Are you here, Nancy?
I saw a little thing come up that it said she left the meeting, so I don't know if she's here,
Oh, snap-a-doodle.
but I could be wrong.
Amanda, is she possibly in the waiting room?
I'm looking through the list to see if she's on still. Oh, and I do not see her. She's not in the waiting room, so she might have.
Okay, well, I will get in touch with her during David's talk, and she can give an update at the end.
Oh,
But
wait, she just got into the waiting room. Hold on.
okay, all right, we're gonna let her back in. We're gonna let her take over. Thanks, guys, for your patience. I know technology sucks, but it also makes meetings like this possible. So thanks for your patience. Is she here? Nancy Schmid?
Just let her in. Where did she go? And now she's gone again.
Okay. All right. Let us wrap up this business portion, get to our speaker, and then we'll have Nancy give the Bowers update at the end of the meeting.
And there she is.
I keep getting kicked out.
I know.
I don't know what's with it. My TV goes off, my iPad goes off.
Your phone wasn't working that great today.
It's something to do with Xfinity.
Yes.
Well, you're here
I'll
now.
try. All right. I'm here at the moment.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on at Bowers Farm?
I can, but I might get cut off right in the middle because I have lots to say too. The Wednesday team leaders have been meeting. We've redesigned or working on redesigning the garden that was taken down by the storm in 2023. The Saturday team leaders are designing the garden that was also damaged in 2023 and is now without the shade of the locust tree. Our native plant sale is May 17th, 10 to 4. We'll also have a smart gardening table and we need volunteers. We now have plans from Martin Duell to redo the Barton Farmhouse garden around the windmill. And they will pay for the plants. We've met with, or I've met with Erin Watson, who's the event planner at the farm, and she would like the master gardeners to be more involved in open barn. And we've talked about having a smart gardening table several times during the summer, as well as having brief demonstrations or discussions set in our gardens. As soon as this is finalized with my team leaders and we decide on topics, I will let everyone know, and we will need volunteers for that also. It'll be a great way to get hours that's considered educating in the gardens. Bowers School Farm and our gardens are finally participants in the American Horticultural Network. This entitles Bowers members to attend with special privileges over 380 gardens across the US. And you receive special discounts. If you would like to know what gardens are listed, you may visit the website of the American Horticultural Gardens. Master gardeners who volunteer at least 20 hours at Bowers. Here's another good reason to be a Bowers volunteer. You can receive membership at Bowers at a discounted rate of $45 annually. If you have not visited schoolfarm.org recently, they have made a special page just for the Master Gardeners of Oakland County. And this also
There she goes. But while she's gone, I will say the American Horticultural Society designating your garden as one of their own in the reciprocal program is a really big deal. I am a member and I sign up every year because I get free entrance into some of the most renowned botanical gardens and public gardens across the country. So this was a huge effort and it is a really big deal. So um, when Nancy is here, we'll congratulate her. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda and we can get started with our speaker. So thanks, everyone. Nice to see you.
Right before we get started, I think most everybody is muted. Please continue to stay muted. If possible, turn your camera off just to avoid any visual distractions during the presentation. And without further ado, just to get things going, I'm going to turn things over to our speaker, David Lowenstein, who spoke for us several times before on wild pollinators in Michigan. Are you ready to go, David?
Yes, I am. Okay. Thank you again for the invitation, and I appreciate the switch to remote for this evening. Wasn't too excited to be driving in a snowy evening, and I'm sure most of you probably wouldn't be either. Nonetheless, we have the same exact presentation. I'm just in front of your camera instead of in front of you physically. So we are going to learn about bees in Michigan. And there's a couple things we will go over this evening. We'll talk about the kinds of bees that we have within Michigan. We'll cover some of the things that bees need to survive. Some of that will probably be a little bit repetitive for you, but always good to highlight things that different insects, different plants need. And then we'll end with a discussion about whether or not bees are disappearing and some ideas for pollinator conservation and whether there's truth or not truth to them. We'll start first with some general entomology. I might have talked about insects in the past to this audience, but I want to give a refresher about what actually makes a bee. So the shortest possible answer is a vegetarian wasp. And it's not a joke. Bees and wasps are closely related to each other, but wasps are an older group of insects, and the bees branched out from that group. Instead of being predators, they feed on pollen and nectar. Like all insects, bees have three body parts. They have a head, they have a thorax, and they have an abdomen in the rear body part. Bees have two pairs of wings. They have legs. Those are always attached to the thorax. And the bee has two types of mouth parts. It has mandibles for manipulating leaves, plants, sometimes gathering leaves, as we'll learn with leafcutter bees. And it also has a proboscis, a straw-like mouth part that they use for slurping on nectar. Bees differ from wasps, not just in their feeding habits, but also in their appearance, because bees will collect pollen for their offspring. Uh, Bees need a way to keep that pollen attached to their body, and hairs on the body are a good way to do that. Technically, wasps do have some hairs on their body, but they are not branched hairs. So I can annotate on the screen, a branched hair would basically look sort of like a Y. You'd have the hair coming out from the exoskeleton, and then it would have two parts emerging from it. And there are lots and lots of hairs on bees. Most of the time, those hairs are on the legs of bees. Sometimes they are beneath the abdomen in one or two particular groups. I talked about how bees have two pairs of wings, so do wasps, but flies only have a single set of wings. They do not have four wings. So that's an easy way to distinguish bees from flies. There's a lot of flies that are excellent mimics of bees, and they try to mimic bees because if you look like something that can sting, you're less likely to get attacked by another insect. It is possible to tell the number of wings on a fly or a bee if it is a larger insect. Also, flies tend to have shorter and more stub-like antennae, whereas bees and wasps have longer antennae on their bodies. So these are the mouth parts that I talked about a moment earlier. This is what it looks like when the proboscis is open. Unless the bee is actively feeding on the nectary of a flower, you're not going to see that proboscis out, that straw, because the proboscis will be held under the head when it's not in use. So feel free to use the chat for this question, but about how many species of bees do you think there are in Michigan? Globally, we have something like 20,000. And actually, North America is a hotspot for bees. Part of the country with the greatest number of bee species is actually the desert Southwest. 500, 500, 62, 1,500. I like that very specific number of 62, 800. So we have some numbers all over the place. Okay, Mel, you you know the answer because you're a wealth of insect trivia. Technically, the answer is it's either 462 or 463. Sometimes the number of bee species can change, a new species is found, or what was thought to be a species is determined that it's actually two members of the same species, but with greater genetic testing, they realized that although they look almost identical, maybe those slight differences in appearance are just because of a different morph. So we'll call it roughly 460 species of bees. Now, there are a variety of different groups of bees. For some of these species, there might be 40 or 50 that if I were to show you pin bees, you would say, what's the difference between them? They look nearly identical. And those differences might just be grooves and bumps that you can only see under the microscope, under 20 or 40 times magnification. But we're going to focus on some of the more major groups of pollinators, specifically bees, that we have within Michigan. Now, when we use the term pollinator, that can mean any kind of insect or even non-insect that helps pollinate a plant. So if we're using the term pollinators, that includes bees. We're talking about a bee 99% of the time, it is a pollinator. There are a few species of bees that don't pollinate, but rather they parasitize other bees. They're called cuckoo bees, but we might use the term pollinator or bee interchangeably this evening. And we're focusing strictly on wild ones, bee species that are not managed by humans. The honeybee being the most common type of managed pollinator, but there are a few species of other pollinators, certain bumblebees that can be purchased in boxes. There's also leafcutter bees that can be purchased, although those are used more commonly in the West Coast as a managed pollinator for pollinating alfalfa. So this is a snapshot of some of the bee groups that we're going to be talking about this evening. There's also a few more, and I love bees. I mean, I could probably talk for multiple sessions about each of these kinds of bees. So if you have any more specific questions about bees later this evening, I'd be happy to entertain them at the end of my presentation. So we're going to start first with our smallest pollinator in Michigan, the yellow-faced bees. These are only about 1/8 of an inch as adults. What you're looking at here is a dill flower. So this is one floret on dill, and this is a mature yellow-faced bee. They get their name from the yellow markings on the head, on the thorax, on the abdomen, and on the legs, which are a bit tough to see in my mediocre photography, but easier to see in this animation here. These bees are nesters in the ground, and they don't actually contribute a whole lot to pollination. One, because of their size. If you're a tiny bee, you're not going to be able to transport as much pollen compared to something bigger, like a bumblebee. And second of all, they actually are hairless. They have a special stomach within their body that they ingest pollen and then they regurgitate it at a later time. So yellow-faced bees are more of a novelty than a fantastic pollinator. Although there are some specialist yellow-faced bees in Hawaii that do pollinate just a few plants. And we have, I think, 4 to 6 species of yellow-faced bees in Michigan. The next group of bees are the black sweat bees. These bees are either in the genus Lasioglossum or the genus Halictus. The main difference between those two genera are where the hairs start on the body of the bee. So this is a Halictus, and the hairs on each segment of the abdomen, they begin at the rear section of the abdomen, whereas on Lasioglossum, the hairs begin on the front segment of the abdomen. A little hard to see, but this is our abdominal segment. Hairs begin in the front, and much easier to see on this Halictus here. These are the most common kinds of sweat bees within Michigan. There's roughly 60, maybe 70 types of sweat bees in the state. The differences between them tend to be ones that you can only see under a microscope, or perhaps it's related to veins on the wing. There are a few types of social sweat bees. So just like honeybees and bumblebees are social, there are sweat bees that have a queen and there are workers, but the colony size is really small, maybe 50 to 200 bees. And these would all be found beneath the ground because they nest in the soil, and they are found in every kind of habitat in the state and beyond. You'll find them in vacant lots, suburban neighborhoods, farms, meadows, forests. There are sweat bees that are found all over. Sometimes their nesting habits might be a bit different. Certain kinds of sweat bees will nest in all soil compositions. Others will only nest in sandy or gravelly soils. My personal favorite are the green sweat bees. I actually have a painting of a green sweat bee, and since I'm presenting from home, I'll show you what that looks like. Let me unblur my background for a moment. This is my beloved green sweat bee. I did not paint this sweat bee. I am not an artist, but it is a beautiful insect, and not just to look at in a painting, but even to just observe in the field. Many people think that you have to go to the tropics or a warm climate to see really colorful insects, and that's not true. We have them here in Michigan, and if you have perennials or wildflowers in your yard, you almost certainly have green sweat bees too. You just might not realize it because they are fast flyers, and oftentimes people confuse them with flies because we're so used to green flies. There are about 5 species of green sweat bees. They are either all green except for one species, which has a green head and thorax and an all black abdomen. Sometimes the males in a few species, instead of being all green, they will have yellow and black on their abdomen instead, and they will also be a bit smaller. In addition to visiting ornamental plants, green sweat bees, as well as black sweat bees, they'll visit weeds too. So if you have white clover, which we'll call a weed in asterisks, or dandelion or chicory, and people are complaining why you haven't gotten rid of them, you can use the excuse that you're leaving some food for the bees. Although dandelion is not as good of a resource for pollinators compared to something like white clover or thyme. The next bee is the carpenter bee. Carpenter bees nest in wood. One specific species, Xylocopa virginica, is the largest species of bee that we have. They're over an inch in length. They're sometimes considered a pest because they will nest in pergolas or other wood structures. And when they're boring their circular holes within the wood, they are laying eggs within those holes. So there could be anywhere between 3 to 11 eggs within each of these holes. And the eggs spend the winter there, developing into a larva, and they hatch the next season, emerging again. There is another kind of carpenter bee that's far smaller than Xylocopa. It is bees in the order Ceratina. They too nest in wood. Usually they'll nest in logs or rotting wood instead of structural wood, but they are a shiny metallic bee. And I've shown you a picture of what those pupa look like within the wood. Bee pupa and bee larva, they're kind of ugly. They're not the nicest things to observe, but most of the time you're not going to see them because they lay those larvae either in wood, if they're cavity nesting bee, or in the ground if they are a ground nesting bee. And they have no defenses as larva or pupa. So it's probably for the best that they are laid hidden in a cell in the ground or beneath wood. The next group of bees are the Melisodes, the longhorned bees. This is a pretty diverse group of bees. They feed on a variety of different kinds of flowers. They are solitary, one bee per nest. They have really dense hairs on their body. There's one group, Melisodes bimaculata, which are a really beautiful bee. They are all black except for really light and uh, robust amounts of hair on the hind leg of the bee. There is one group of Melisodes that are specialists of sunflowers. So if you grow sunflowers and you see bees visiting the flowers all day long, day after day, that would be the sunflower bee. And the males actually sleep in the flowers. So if you look at these sunflowers, at the end of the day or early in the morning or in a rainy day, you'll see the males clinging to dear life. And the most that I've seen in a sunflower in my yard is 8 bees sleeping on the plant. So I'm very happy to operate bee shelters on the sunflowers within the yard. And the reason that the male bees sleep on the flowers, and this isn't unique just to Melisodes, is because once the males emerge as adults, they're not welcome back inside the nest. They have one purpose, that's mating. They are not a monogamous group. They're not a paired group. They don't take care of the offspring, so potentially a fair trade-off. If they're not doing anything, why should they be invited to the nest underground? The next group of bees are the bumblebees, ones that we're probably very familiar with. We have 20 species of bumblebees in Michigan. The most common kind of bumblebee is Bombus impatiens, one with a mostly yellow thorax and first segment of the abdomen all yellow and the rest all black. What we are looking at here is pollen that's collected on the leg of the bumblebee. So the pollen can be a different color, just depends on the kind of plant that they are visiting. These are the workhorses of the pollinator world. They are active basically all day long, unless it's raining. Because of their large size, they can carry a lot of pollen. And for certain kinds of flowers, like tomatoes, they do something called buzzed pollination. So they vibrate their wings very quickly, and that causes a frequency that allows the pollen to be released from the anthers. Does the same thing as a tuning fork. If you were to put a tuning fork outside of a tomato, you would also see uh, the pollen be released from those anthers. It's possible to identify bumblebees to the species just by sight. You can see here this Bombus fervidus. This is a more northern bumblebee compared to Bombus impatiens. It looks completely different than this species here. It has a black strip that goes across the entire thorax, and almost every segment of the abdomen is bright yellow. There is a guide that can be used to identify bumblebee workers to the species level. This is what the pictures in the guide will look like. Sometimes there's only one color pattern for bumblebee workers, such as in Bombus impatiens and Bombus vagans. Other times there are a couple color patterns, like in Bombus mammiculatus. They're mostly the same, all yellow on the first segment of the abdomen, and then a little bit of yellow on the second, but sometimes that small amount of yellow carries over to the end of the segment. This is the name of the guide that these are taken from, Bumblebees of the Eastern United States. It's free to download as a PDF. It was published maybe close to a decade ago already, but nothing has changed in terms of the colors of these bees. Still the same. Not every single bee species within this guide is present in Michigan, but most of them are. And there is a similar guide for bumblebees of the western US, since the bumblebees on the other side of the Rockies do differ from the ones that we have here in Michigan. Next group of bees are the mason and leafcutter bees. These are distinguished by the location of their hairs for collecting pollen. You may have noticed they are beneath the abdomen rather than on the leg. And they are colored because they are completely covered in pollen. This one has coneflower pollen. This one, I'm blanking on the name of the species uh, for this plant. But again, the color of those hairs. It could be white, it could be yellow. It depends on the pollen that's on them. These are really fast flyers. It's hard to get a good look at them from up close because they'll move away and they tend to fly side to side a bit more so than other kinds of bees. These are bees that nest in cavities. So if you're thinking about getting a bee condo or you have a bee condo, these are the kinds of bees that you would be likely to see within there. One bee that is unique but not native to our area is the wool carder bee. It looks a lot like a wasp because the top part of the bee is completely shiny and almost all hairless, except for some small hairs in the thorax. But all the hairs are in the bottom segment of the bee. And the wool carder bee is native to Europe. It's a very territorial bee. The males will patrol an area in search of females, and they will actually knock away other bee species, even honeybees and bumblebees, that visit flowers in the areas that they patrol because they don't want anything besides for females of their species to visit that area. Another colorful kind of bee in this group is osmia. One type is the blue orchard bee. Some orchards, some blueberry growers, some cherry growers, they will keep colonies of osmia because they are excellent pollinators of both crops. We do have them in Southeast Michigan. They are not as common, though, as some of the other kinds of leafcutter bees. Another group of bee that we have that is a specialist are squash bees. If you grow squash, chances are you have squash bees. They're about the size of a honeybee, but their body is more orange, especially the thorax, which is filled with small orange hairs. These are early morning visitors because squashes will close by late morning, so they have to visit their flowers when they are open. Just like the sunflower bee, the males will sleep in squash flowers. So if you open up squash flowers just a little bit, you might see a male bee sleeping within there, and they will nest pretty close to squashes in the soil. Mining bees are one of the earliest active bees in Michigan. Pretty much as soon as the forsythias begin to flower, you will see mining bees in the ground. These are bees in the genera of Calides and Andrena. They nest often in close proximity to each other. So in March or April, and sometimes into May, you'll see what looks like little piles with dime shape or diameter of a dime or smaller holes within them. These are not ant nests. Each of these hosts a single bee within the hole. Best thing to do is just leave them alone. They might fly around you. They don't want to sting people. And in addition to visiting shrubs like forsythia, these tend to visit a lot of flowering trees like maples and willows early in the season. Now, when we think about bees and the number of species that exist, these are not just species that have been identified hundreds or decades of years ago. There are new species that are continuously discovered, sometimes in places that might seem surprising. There was a species just about a decade ago that was discovered in downtown Toronto, and there was another kind of bee that was discovered in the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens called Lasioglossum gotham. You can see what it was named for. Now, who is discovering these bees? It's a select number of people. These are bees that probably were already in people's collections. They're sent to specialists of Lasioglossum or sweat bees to identify. There's only 3 or 4 specialists that I know of in North America. They evaluate the bee and they realize, something is off about this species. We're trying to key it to the correct one, but it doesn't match anything. So they run some barcoding and other molecular tests and realize, wait, this is actually a different species, even though it looks very similar to another one. Also, existing bee species that are struggling and threatened can be found in cities too. Just because an area has a high population density does not mean that it can't be a good habitat for a pollinator. So Bombus affinis, which is an endangered, excuse me, not Bombus aphilis, Bombus, I think it's Terricola, the rusty patched bumblebee, uh, federally endangered species of bee. It was found in the north side of Chicago near a train station, and it's been found in a number of places in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. Bombus affinis is another species of bumblebee, which hasn't been found in Michigan since the 90s, but has been found in Illinois and Wisconsin. So we're going to shift to strategies to help wild bees. And as you can see, just because a neighborhood is developed does not mean that there can't be bees in that area. And it comes down to you, the gardener, who knows that we need to plant the right kinds of plants for helping bees, but also sharing that with other people, including people who might be more resistant to doing things that attract bees. Maybe they think that they're going to get stung, and that's not the case. Bees only sting defensively unless you were to try to grab a bee with your hand or destroy its nest or stick your finger within there. It's really, really hard to get stung by a bee. The only times I've been stung by bees are when I accidentally aspirated them into my mouth using a special tool for collecting them. The filter wasn't working properly. Had some sweat bees sting my tongue. They probably weren't very happy either. And there's another time where I needed to identify a bumblebee. I didn't have the right vessel with me, so I grabbed it with my hands, hoping that it was a male. It wasn't. It was a female. I got stung. Most people don't take that risk, nor should you. And this graphic here comes from a really nice graphic novel about honeybees. It's called Clan Apis. Really great read for youth as well as adults. I would encourage you to check out that book. It should be obvious if you're trying to attract bees that you need flowers. Uh, the flowers that are best for bees tend to be perennials. They tend to be native plants, although there are non-native plants, such as Russian sage or lavenders, which can be attractive to bees too. It's really a matter of personal preference as to whether you go strictly with native plants or incorporate some non-native plants. There's no shortage of native plants that we have that are good for pollinators. And if you are planting a garden for pollinators, you need to consider the bloom time of those plants. The majority of plants within pollinator gardens, they tend to bloom in the middle of summer. So think about plants that might bloom later in the season or that might bloom earlier in the season too. A lot of the annuals that keep their color not year round, but for 1 month or 2 months, like begonias or petunias, they're really wax apples to pollinators. They look pretty, but they don't have much nectar within them. They are bred by plant breeders to look good at the expense of any kind of nutritional value for pollinators. I heard that you're having a speaker talk about bee lawns, so that'll be excellent to get more information about ways to make your lawn more attractive to bees. As you can see in this picture, this is a desert for a bee. There's nothing within there that a bee is going to use for resources. It's probably not going to nest in there either because that lawn looks like it's mowed pretty low and pretty frequently. But there are ways to make lawns more attractive to pollinators. Bee lawns would be one. I'm not going to go into bee lawns today. There's also what we call maybe a bit more of the lazy lawn look. So if you were to mow your lawn every 2 weeks, and even every 3 weeks if you can, instead of weekly, that might allow certain kinds of plants, such as wild or white clover, which actually provides free nitrogen, to grow high enough and bloom, and bumblebees and other kinds of wild bees will visit white clover. It's really a matter of preference. Some people just can't stand the look of anything besides for green grass in the lawn, but there's nothing wrong with having certain kinds of weedy or non-weedy plants growing within lawns too, or incorporating other kinds of plants into your lawn to break up the monotony of it, such as these marigolds or this sunflower. MSU Extension has a nice tool on finding the right plants for your garden to match the location, to match the soil type. So this, if you were to type in plant search tool, MSU extension, or you scan this QR code, you'll get to the same place and you can find a list of plants that are attractive to pollinators and natural enemies. The other way to try to attract bees is through nesting habitat. If you're trying to attract cavity nesting bees, the only way to do that would be having trees or logs somewhere around or near your property, or through creating bee condos. Now, there are a lot of bee condos that are available for purchase in stores or online. Some of them are actually good for bees. Others of them look nice, but are not likely to attract a lot of pollinators. The best kinds have holes of different diameters, or they have holes of the correct diameter. So they might be about 1/8 of an inch to maybe 2/3 of an inch in diameter. And ideally, there are ways to reach both sides of it. So sometimes there's an opening that you can open up the backside of the tube. And that's important because if you set up a bee condo, you need to clean those tubes at least every other year. When you put lots of insects together, you can have diseases or viruses the same way when you put lots of people together. It's also possible to make your own bee condo. There is a resource that MSU Extension has. It has many pages about how to build them, how to maintain them, whether or not you line them with straws or clean them with a pipe cleaner every other year. When you are using bee condos, be aware that you're also going to attract solitary wasps to your bee condo, and that's not a bad thing. These are not yellow jackets, bald-faced hornets. These are small predatory wasps that will feed on things like spiders, grasshoppers, and other insects. So this is a study from a colleague of mine who was based in Toronto. He set up these bee condos throughout multiple sites in Toronto, and what we see here are the kinds of insects that nested within the bee condo, within each cell, over 3 years. And actually, the most frequent kind was native wasps, followed by native bees. And these native wasps that are nesting in there, that's free, beneficial insect services, which may attack pests in the garden. Last thing I want to talk about with bee condos is the maintenance for them. Here we can see a bee condo that has been opened. This is one of my favorite kinds. It actually comes in a detachable design. It has 2 parts, and you can just open up both parts of it. You can see the cocoons within there. You can take the cocoons out early in the spring, keep them in the fridge, and then more easily clean out each of these tubes, and then release the cocoons once flowers start to emerge. If you do set up bee condos, location is also important. You don't want to put them on the ground. You want to put them a few feet off the ground so a predator can't get into those bee condos. And it's best to have them south or east facing. Those are the 2 sides that will get better sun. They won't fry if they're facing west, and it allows them to leave the nest and heat up earlier in the day. The other kind of strategy for attracting bees is leaving some undisturbed areas in the soil. And there's a debate about whether springtime cleaning it has a negative impact to bees and other beneficial insects. The debate is unresolved, but it probably depends on how extensive of a cleaning you are doing. If you're doing deep digging in the ground, there's a greater chance you might disturb overwintering insects. If you're doing light work or you're just pruning back ornamental grasses or other plants that were left over in the wintertime, you're less likely to disturb the pollinators that are present. And then there's no mow May. For a couple years, there was a big movement to not mow your lawn during the time of May. The concept originated in the United Kingdom in 2019, and then there was a study which was now retracted that came out of Appleton, Wisconsin, about unmowed lawns having more bees than mowed areas. But the study design was flawed. They compared unmowed lawns to mowed parks, which isn't a fair uh, way of contrasting them because parks are naturally just going to be mowed low. They're not going to allow wildflowers to be growing in a soccer field or in the middle of a park. And the way that they identified the bees was also kind of shoddy. That study was retracted. If you don't mow your lawn for a month, you're welcome to do that. If you have signage, that's probably better. But turf by itself does not attract bees. The best kind of habitat for bees is going to be a mix of wildflowers and grasses, places for bees to find shelter. So we talked already about ways to help bees, different kinds of plants, and plants that bloom in different kinds of the season. One point I did not talk about yet is pesticides. There may be a time and place for using pesticides or herbicides in your garden, but don't spray blooming trees, shrubs, or plants. You don't want pollinators to get poisoned by any pesticide use on them. And weeds are another thing to think about. If you're looking to get rid of white clover in your lawn, it would be better to mow the white clover down rather than just spraying blooming white clover, since that might lead to bees visiting the white clover after it's sprayed. Shouldn't be a surprise to anyone here at this point in the presentation that yards and gardens, they are refuges for pollinators. There was a study showing that about 90% of urban crops, they do benefit from bee pollination. So it's important to make sure you plant the right kinds of flowers within there. Quick bee trivia at this point. Only one of these is a bee. So, do we think it's the upper left, upper right, the lower left, or the lower right? You could put in the chat. Give you just a little bit of time to do that. It's not a trick question. It's just one bee here. While you're doing that, we'll try to rule out probably one of the easier ones why it's not a bee. This is a fly. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Antennae really short, only one pair of wings. This is also a fly here. This has a hairy body. This is a bombyllid. It's a bee fly. Looks a lot like a bumblebee, but again, just one pair of wings. This is our bee. This is our green sweat bee. This is not our bee. Although it looks very similar to our green sweat bee, this is what's called a chrysidid wasp or a cuckoo wasp, jewel wasp. They are parasites of bees. They will feed on the larvae of bees and other small insects. They do not have the same amount of hairs as this bee would, but it's pretty hard to tell just from the photo. But this one is not a bee. This is actually a wasp. So that was our question of the night. Sometimes people ask, well, I'm doing everything right. Why don't I have bees? So the final part of our talk is going to discuss some reasons why you might not be seeing bees in your yard. First of all, you might just not have enough flowers. And even if you have enough flowers, It depends on the surroundings around your yard. If you're in an area where nearly everything is just grass or impervious surfaces, malls, industry, parking lots, you're not going to have as many bees because some bees, they will fly anywhere from 200 feet to 2 miles in search of resources. Some years are just better for bees than others, depends on the weather, depends on the health of the bees. And then, of course, habitat loss would be a reason that you might not find as many pollinators. Urbanization and agriculture aren't the best kinds of habitat for bees, but you can still find bees in both. The problem with urbanization, especially sprawl in newer developed areas, is what was once a single habitat is broken apart or fragmented into smaller areas. So there's less areas that are likely to have flowers within them, less undisturbed area. And then the more general habitat loss. When it's an area that could be useful habitat for bees is being replaced with a different use. So here's an example of fragmentation. This would be more of an older inner ring suburb. You can see each of these individual lots might be habitat that bees could use. Perhaps there's some areas that are a little bit more green canopy than others, and then more of an exurban habitat where we have farms, subdivision, and then just small a few fragments left of area. Now, bees can still survive in these spots, but urbanization is especially difficult for specialist bees, bees that might only feed on particular kinds of flowers or have unique habitat requirements like sandy soils or certain kinds of logs. There was a study a few years back that looked at the most common types of reasons that bees go into decline. This one looked at bumblebees. And you might find it a bit surprising. It was not habitat loss that was number one, but actually parasites, things like mites and other diseases that led to decreases in bumblebees. Now, habitat loss, which is the green and also the green shading in some of these boxes in the pie chart, was the second most common reason. And then here are pesticides. These are neonicotinoid seed treatments that led to lethality in bumblebees. If you're looking to learn more about pollinators, there is a great course online from the Michigan Pollinator Initiative. It's called the Pollinator Champions course. It's free. It's a self-paced online course. It goes into a lot more detail about all things pollinators related. There's also a nice guide from the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, and I think I'll show you the webpage in just a moment. And it shows you the historical ranges as well as the current range of bees. So, for example, this is Bombus pennsylvanicus, and you can see pre-2000 it was found in much of the Lower Peninsula, but since 2000, only an area of western Michigan near Grand Rapids is this bee found. This is just another way of showing decline in some bumblebees. There was a study by an entomology lab at MSU comparing how different bees are doing within the state using pre-2000 and post-2000 records. Some bees are doing great. Areas with red shading indicate increases in the number of bees. So these two species here, there's actually more of them in the last 20 years compared to pre-2000. This is Bombus affinis, that species I mentioned, which hasn't been found since the 90s. So the gray indicates places that were more common pre-2000. Bombus auricumus, in some parts of the state, increasing, but as a whole, this bee is decreasing. And what we see here for this other kind of bee, Bombus borealis, it's doing better in northern parts of the state, potentially due to climate change. This is a bee that does not like heat and warm temperatures as much as other species. So this is what I wanted to show you about how to find the range of bumblebees. I'll just take a minute or so to show you the web page. should still be sharing. I could get a thumbs up or a yes in the chat if you can still see this.
We can still see it.
Excellent. So this is what that Michigan Bumblebee Explorer looks like. So this is Bombus borealis. It shows you the counties where it's found. You can zoom in. So similar to that paper, because the data comes from there, it also shows you the preferred flowers for this kinds of species. Common name, which we don't often use for bumblebees. Usually we use the scientific name. And species that it might be confused with. So if you're really trying to attract uh, Bombus borealis, for example, it's going to be tough to do in our area because it's just not as common here anymore. But these are the kinds of plants you'd need to find. Whereas a species like Bombus griseoculus, which is really common, species of plants they really like include blazing star, milkweeds, St. John's wort, and bergamot or bee balm. So a really great tool to look at different ranges of pollinators that are bumblebees and plants that they especially like. And one of the last things I wanted to show you was my case of bees that I was planning to bring and have you look at. So instead of seeing it in person, you get to see my bee case from a photo. And the bottom row are the bee mimics. This is a cool one here. It's the Midas fly. Looks a lot like a bee, but not a pollinator. Not a whole lot known about what the Midas fly does. The places I see it the most are actually playgrounds and wood chips. I think they lay their eggs in wood chips. Naturally, they like um, wood and leaf litter. Just an odd tangent about them. You probably all know about our website as Extension Master Gardeners, but if you don't, I would encourage you to use it. Ask your gardening questions online if you have them on Ask Extension or the Lawn and Garden Hotline. And finally, if you have any comments you wanted to share, feel free to use the evaluation, which is just a QR code and no paper evaluations today. So that's all I have, and happy to take any questions at this point.
And if anybody wants to, feel free to unmute themselves. You can ask a question verbally, or if you would prefer to type it in the chat, we can pass that along as well. Anything that you might have that you are curious about. I did have a question for you, David. Is there like a top 5 plants? Like if we really want to like get the best bang for our buck as far as attracting pollinators to our garden, especially the bees, what would you recommend?
Bee balm is a great one. That'll attract all sorts of pollinators. And oh man, sunflowers, any kind of sunflower. Sunflowers will get larger pollinators, they'll get smaller pollinators. I don't know if I'd put hibiscus in my top 5, but I love hibiscus. And there's not just hibiscus syriacus, there's also rose swamp mallow. I put that in my garden recently, and they sell that at the Blue Water Conservation District uh, tree sale. I know they have a space in Clinton Township that they sell it at. That's a lower growing hibiscus. And I love those because the bees that come out of it, they're just covered in white pollen. I don't know if it's top 5, but just a novelty.
And you most interested?
Liatris is another good one. A lot of bees will visit that one. And then I would say white clover too. A lower growing plant that has shorter flowers. As some of the ones I mentioned, the flowers are a bit longer, they're tubular. So then like white clover or herbs. Bees love herbs, oregano, thyme, mint. The small flowers will bring in lots of bees, lots of sweat bees, yellow face bees, and also wasps too.
And we had a question about the no mow May. Why did you say that that does not work?
It comes down to the habitat needs of pollinators. So no mow May will make your grass grow tall, but bees cannot use grass blades for nutrition. Uh, they need pollen and nectar. So no, what no mow May might do, sometimes you might have plants growing within your garden during no mow May, but if you're going to mow them anyway after 4 weeks, you'd be better off just putting a corner of your lawn with wildflowers instead, since the majority of what's growing in your garden in No Mow May is just going to be grasses and potentially weedy plants, which also are not going to be attractive to pollinators. Mowing less frequently would be the better strategy. And also, I mow every 2 to 3 weeks, and that can be hard enough in the middle of summer if we get a lot of rain. If you don't mow for 4 weeks, you're going to have a fun time trying to mow that grass after 4 weeks.
Hopefully you have a sharp blade at that point. I had another question for you. I know a lot of people say to leave, so many inches or more up when we're cutting plants back to leave a place for insects to overwinter. Is that true? Like if we leave them there until the next April or May, is that enough, or do they have to go for a couple winters? Is it any beneficial to do that at all, or?
Well, bees just live for a single generation. So if they overwinter, they might not in the ground, they might not use the same spot next year. It could be a
Okay.
completely different colony. So I would say it depends on your timing. If it's easier for you to do your garden work in beginning of April or in November, do it then. But if you're working in the ground and you start to notice larvae within there, those larvae, they look kind of grub-like. They're not as big as white grubs. That would be a sign, probably stop and wait and just kick some more dirt back onto the larvae that you've disturbed. I don't think it's very common in yards to see hundreds or a high density of bee larvae within a garden. But just use caution, especially if you're going to be digging really deep. But better if you can to wait a little later in the spring. But if you need to do it early, uh, you're not going to cause any drastic problems for the bee population. There's far worse things to do than work your garden in the spring.
Did anybody else have any other questions for
I
David?
I have a question. David, we bought a carpenter bee condo or house this season, and we actually attached it in the proper direction and the proper height. And we were so excited because we had a full house. And then later in the season, we noticed that something had eaten every one of the nest. And is that just a predator wasp
When
that
you
do?
said eaten every
Well,
nest,
I mean, it had been cleaned out. Every cell had been disturbed.
uh, that I mean, it could be predatory wasp, but if everything is getting cleaned out, that might have been some other kind of insect predator. It might have been a, a larger one, um, not necessarily the wasps. Unfortunately, you drew the short end of the stick with that. It's
Yeah, we were really disappointed. And is there any way to like avoid that in the future, or it's just
no, because
nature?
you wouldn't want to put a mesh directly over the front of
Right.
the bee condo. I have seen it where people will put wire, but not directly on it. They might do it a few inches in front of it because if it's touching or too close to the holes, the bees
Hmm.
won't like that. So
Okay.
that could be something to look into, putting some kind of mesh that's still fine enough that they can get back and forth. But if it was a larger predator, maybe it would discourage them. It is uncommon for every single nest to be completely eaten
Yeah,
in
it
one
was. There
season.
was not one cell that was not left disturbed. So yeah, it was disappointing. So, all right, but thank you.
You're welcome. I see the question in the chat. Is it safe to clean out the bee condo in the winter? If you are, if you have the kind of bee condo where the tubes can be split apart, yes, you can remove the cocoons and they'll have to stay in a fridge or other cool spot because otherwise they'll start to emerge too soon. If it's the kind of bee condo where you can only access the tubes from one side, you cannot clean it in the winter with a pipe cleaner. If you clean it in the winter when the cells are capped, you will kill all the bees within there. You'll have to wait until the spring when you notice the cells are no longer capped with mud or grass, and then get your pipe cleaner in there and sanitize those tubes.
Was there any other questions for David tonight?
David, you said that the condos can be, you can put a straw in there. Would that be a paper straw versus a plastic straw?
Yes, paper straw. The idea behind that is you can replace the paper straws seasonally. Uh, so that takes the place of needing to clean each individual cell with a pipe cleaner or another tool.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for David tonight?
David, as always, that was a phenomenal talk and super informative. We hope you can bring your bug board to next year's edition. Regardless of what you talk about, I think that'd be really interesting for us to see. Or maybe even if you wanted to bring it in April for Louisa's Day, that could be cool. If there are no questions, I just want to remind everyone that I did put some links in the chat, and one person even bought their ticket during our meeting. So excellent. And we will see you all on March 12th.
Thanks again for the invite. Don't forget the Macomb cut. You sell your products at our association. I'm just
Yeah.
joking. I'm joking. I'm joking.
All right. I'm gonna head out. And I invite everyone else to do the same. Bye.
Emily, is this an hour of education? Hour
This
and
was an
15?
hour of education, and Julie Fromm will be sending out that meeting wrap up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Stay safe. It is blowing out there.
Yes, he was.